All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling a topic that's, well, it's constantly buzzing around us, but maybe not always in the way we fully grasp it. We're talking about dopamine.
Yeah, and it often gets this simple label, doesn't it? The
Hmm.
pleasure chemical.
Hmm.
That feel-good hit you get after doing something enjoyable.
Hmm.
But the sources we're digging into today, they really fundamentally challenge that whole idea.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack what are source materials, and we're drawing heavily from insights in summaries of The Molecule of More by Daniel Lieberman and Michael Long, what it reveals about dopamine's true nature.
Right.
We want to see how these authors suggest this. This powerful chemical actually drives our desires, shapes our decisions, and, impacts not just our lives, but maybe society itself.
So let's tackle that common idea head on.
Mm.
If dopamine isn't simply about feeling pleasure right now, what is it then?
Yeah.
The sources make a really clear argument.
Mm.
Dopamine isn't the molecule of pleasure, it's the molecule of more.
The molecule of more. Okay.
Yes.
So it's less about enjoying what you have, like, in the moment,
Right.
and more about wanting what you don't have yet. Is that it?
Precisely. It's focused almost entirely on desire, pursuit, and anticipation.
Yeah.
It's that drive to reach for the future, to acquire something, to achieve something.
Okay.
And there's this classic experiment with a monkey that illustrates it perfectly.
Oh, right. The monkey experiment. Yeah. Walk us through that one.
Okay, so initially, when a monkey got a food reward, like a piece of fruit, there was
Yeah.
a dopamine spike when it ate the fruit. Pretty straightforward.
Seems to fit the pleasure idea. Yeah.
Right. But then the scientists introduced a signal, like a light that always came on just before the food appeared.
Mm.
And then things changed.
What happened? How did it change?
Well, the dopamine spike,
Yeah.
it moved. It stopped happening when the monkey actually got the food and ate it.
No way.
Yeah, it started happening the moment the light came on.
So the dopamine was triggered by the waiting, the anticipation of the reward.
Exactly. Not the reward itself. The expectation was the key.
Wow. Okay, so the thrill wasn't actually in the banana, it was in knowing the banana was coming. That feels backwards.
It does, doesn't it? And the sources describe that feeling, that dopamine surge during anticipation, as almost an illusory pleasure.
Illusory. Why illusory?
Well, because the thing you're waiting for might not actually arrive. Or, and this is crucial, even if it does, the good feeling you get from having it fades super quickly. Dopamine's already looking ahead.
Huh. So dopamine's already planning its next move before you've even finished enjoying the thing you just got.
Pretty much, yeah.
Mm.
And this ties into another really core idea from the sources. This concept that the brain sort of divides our reality into two different zones.
Ah, the near space and far space thing.
Exactly. Near space is all the stuff that's right here, tangible, within reach. The people you're with, the food on your plate, the chair you're sitting in. It's the immediate here and now.
Got it.
Far space is, well, everything else. It's the goal you're working towards, that city you want to visit, the person you haven't met yet, the thing you want to buy. It's potential, it's future.
And different brain chemicals run these different zones.
That's the idea. Dopamine is the chemical of far space. It's pulling you towards the future, towards getting more. It's all about possibility and changing your current situation.
Okay.
Whereas the here and now chemicals, things like serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, even endocannabinoids, they manage near space. They let you feel satisfaction, contentment, connection, actual pleasure from your present experience.
Right. So dopamine makes you, like, daydream about getting that promotion,
Mm-hmm.
while serotonin helps you maybe appreciate the colleagues you have right now.
Exactly. And you can immediately see why, evolutionarily speaking, dopamine was just so incredibly important.
Yeah, it makes total sense. That drive for more, for what's over the horizon, that would push early humans to explore, right? Find new food sources, better places to live, potential mates.
The sources describe it as this kind of constant internal scout, always on the lookout for the next thing. That relentless push was absolutely key to survival, pushing humans out of Africa, spreading across the globe. They even suggest that, high dopamine levels might be linked to adaptability. If you're always seeking novelty, never quite content, maybe you're better prepared when things change.
So the very chemical that helped us survive way back then might be the source of our kind of modern restlessness.
Precisely. Because dopamine, just by its very nature, can never be satisfied. It's fundamental. Never. You achieve the goal, you buy the thing, you get what you wanted. And for dopamine, that thing instantly becomes part of the boring near space. The excitement, the chemical reward was all in the chase, the pursuit. Once it's yours, dopamine's already scanning the horizon for the next thing to want.
That perfectly explains that feeling, the grass is always greener, or why the thrill of a new phone or car fades so incredibly fast.
And it's really fascinating to see how this plays out in relationships, too.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, the sources draw a distinction between what they call passionate love and compassionate love.
Okay, I'm guessing passionate love is that intense early stage. The butterflies, the excitement.
Definitely. That's
Yeah.
heavily dopamine fueled. It's all about novelty, anticipation, the future possibilities of the relationship. It's thrilling, but almost by definition, it's temporary.
Right.
Compassionate love, though, that's rooted in those here and now chemicals,
Mhm.
oxytocin, endorphins. It's about intimacy, trust, comfort, finding real satisfaction in the shared present moment with that person. That's what builds lasting connection.
So the intense dopamine rush of new love fades because, well, the person becomes familiar. The unexpected stuff becomes expected.
Exactly that. The novelty wears off, so the dopamine trigger weakens. And you can see why maybe some people find long-term relationships difficult, always chasing that initial rush of a new connection,
Yeah.
instead of, cultivating the deeper compassionate bond. The sources describe it almost like being in constant pursuit of a dopamine rush, rather than truly connecting with the person themselves.
Mm.
They also talk about agentic relationships, driven by dopamine, focused on achieving some shared goal, like partners building a business, versus affiliative relationships, which are more about enjoying the social connection itself, powered by those other chemicals.
Okay, so beyond love and relationships, how does this dopamine pursuit thing show up in areas like, say, work or learning or achieving goals?
Well, the sources talk about two main dopamine pathways or circuits that are involved here. There's the basic desire circuit, which is like the engine, the source of that fundamental wanting.
Okay, the urge.
Right. But then there's also a more complex control circuit.
Control circuit.
Right.
That sounds like it involves thinking, planning, strategy maybe.
Yeah, precisely. This circuit handles the higher level stuff. It helps you figure out which desires are actually worth pursuing, allows for long-term planning, strategy, learning new skills, mastering your environment, really getting good at something.
Right.
High dopamine activity here can make you incredibly motivated,
Yeah.
able to push through difficulty, delay gratification, work really hard towards distant goals.
That seems super useful. Essential, even. Is there a catch? A downside?
Well, there can be.
Yeah.
The sources suggest that if this controlled dopamine gets too dominant, you can actually become almost addicted to the process of achieving itself.
Addicted to achieving, how does that work?
You're so driven by the pursuit, by the planning and striving, that you find it really hard to actually stop, feel satisfied, and enjoy the rewards when you get them.
Ah.
The goalposts just keep shifting. You finish one thing, and you're immediately on to the next, without really savoring the win.
Which leads us pretty directly into a really clear and often destructive area where dopamine is absolutely central: addiction.
Yeah, this is where the whole system gets hijacked, essentially. Drugs, gambling, even some behaviors like compulsive shopping or gaming. They artificially flood the brain with these huge, unnatural surges of dopamine.
Way more than you'd get naturally.
Massively more. It's like chemically screaming at your brain, This is the most important thing imaginable. Pursue this above all else. And that starts to rewire the brain's priority.
And withdrawal.
Yeah.
That must tie into that prediction error thing we talked about with the monkey. The crash when the expected high doesn't arrive.
Absolutely. The brain learns to expect that massive dopamine hit. When it doesn't come, dopamine levels plummet below baseline, leading to that intense distress, the cravings, the physical misery of withdrawal. The system is basically screaming for what it's been tricked into thinking is essential for survival.
The sources mention some specific examples, right? Things like alcohol or pornography, which maybe people don't immediately think of in the same way as, say, hard drugs.
Yeah, they make an interesting point about alcohol, that the biggest dopamine release often happens in the early stages. The anticipation, the social buzz, that kind of energetic feeling,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily when someone is deeply intoxicated.
Mm.
And with things like pornography or compulsive sexual behaviors, a big part of the issue highlighted is their sheer accessibility. They can trigger that dopamine release loop so easily, so frequently.
That accessibility point feels really important. The sources basically suggest that readily available things like cigarettes and alcohol cause more addiction problems globally than many illegal drugs, just because they're so easy to get hold of and trigger that cycle repeatedly.
Right. Making those triggers harder to access could actually make a big difference.
It really drives home that addiction isn't just about the substance, is it? It's about that mechanism, that desperate, future-focused dopamine drive getting locked onto something, often as a way to escape the present.
Yeah, avoiding the here and now where maybe things feel difficult or unsatisfying and just constantly chasing that more or different.
Okay, so dopamine pushes us towards the future, the pursuit of more. What else really cranks up dopamine release? What are its big triggers?
One huge one, according to the sources, is uncertainty.
Uncertainty,
Yeah,
like not knowing what's going to happen.
exactly. It's a remarkably powerful stimulus for dopamine.
Huh. Like that little jolt you get finding a $20 bill you forgot about in an old coat. That kind of surprise.
Precisely. Surprise, unexpectedness, potent dopamine fuel. Think about why a good mystery novel keeps you hooked, or why a movie with unpredictable plot twists is so engaging.
Ah.
That uncertainty about what happens next keeps the dopamine flowing. Or think about endless scrolling on social media feeds.
Oh yeah, the doom scroll.
Right. The algorithm keeps feeding you unexpected but potentially relevant new bits of information. Constant novelty, constant uncertainty about what's next. Very dopaminergic.
It's that unpredictable reward schedule, isn't it?
Exactly. Game designers are masters of this. They know giving you, say, a 25% chance of getting a cool item in a game like in a loot box is way more addictive than giving you a 100% chance.
Because 100% is boring, predictable.
Right. And 0% means there's no hope, no anticipation. It's the uncertainty, the maybe that keeps you pulling the lever. Slot machines are the absolute classic example of this intermittent reinforcement.
This sounds like it could even be used manipulatively, maybe in relationships.
Unfortunately, yes, the sources do point this out. Tactics like being hot and cold or someone disappearing and reappearing unpredictably. This creates intense uncertainty for the other person. That uncertainty triggers their dopamine system, making them pursue stability or attention from the person creating the chaos. They get hooked on trying to figure it out, trying to resolve the uncertainty.
Wow. Okay, so dopamine, desire, pursuit, anticipation, uncertainty. What about its role in like our actual thinking, cognition,
One really interesting function linked to dopamine is what psychologists call mental time travel.
mental time travel?
Yeah, that ability you have to project yourself into the future, imagine different scenarios, picture what might happen, and crucially, predict how you might feel about those future outcomes. That seems to be tied into the dopamine system.
Okay. And the sources mentioned something about dreams and a link to psychosis. That sounded pretty intense.
It is a striking comparison they make. So during REM sleep, when we dream most vividly, the dopamine circuits are highly active. But, and this is key, the here and now circuits, the ones that process current reality and keep us grounded, are largely shut down.
Ah.
The sources suggest the state-active dopamine driving internal experiences, but disconnected from external reality perception, actually share some characteristics with psychosis.
Like the brain is just running on dopamine-fueled internal narratives.
Kind of, yeah. But they also note that dreaming, perhaps because it allows these novel connections free from real-world constraints, can also boost creativity when we wake up.
Okay, that's a wild thought. Dreams as sort of temporary creative psychosis. What about that other point they made, the potential link between high dopamine, maybe genius or high achievement, but also social difficulties or even mental illness risk?
Yeah, that's a really critical point about balance, isn't it? High dopamine can fuel incredible focus, drive, and achievement traits often linked to genius or great productivity. But the potential downside is that this intense focus on far space, on future goals and abstract ideas, might come at the cost of suppressing those here and now circuits.
One's needed for empathy and social connection.
Exactly. Reading social cues, feeling empathy, connecting with people in the present moment, those rely heavily on the here and now system. The sources suggest this might explain why some incredibly driven, highly dopaminergic individuals sometimes struggle socially, or might even be at higher risk for conditions like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where there's a disconnect from shared reality or emotional regulation issues.
So the very chemical that helps us, reach for the stars might simultaneously make it harder to connect with the person right next to us.
It's a potential trade-off, yeah.
Yeah.
And looking even bigger picture, how does this constant, maybe unchecked dopamine pursuit impact society as a whole?
What do the sources say about that?
Well, if you scale up this relentless drive for more, you start seeing its fingerprints everywhere. The sources argue it fuels a lot of modern consumerism, that constant desire for the new car, the latest phone, exotic travel, fancy meals, often prioritized over investing in near-space things, like maybe stable family life or building strong communities.
And environmental impacts, does it connect there?
Absolutely. The sources link That insatiable drive for more resources, more production, more economic growth, directly to serious environmental consequences.
Hmm.
Carbon emissions, pollution, resource depletion. They also connect it to potentially dangerous societal pursuits, like nuclear arms races, or maybe the unchecked rapid development of powerful technologies like AI. The drive for more capability, more power, can overshadow the present reality of the risks involved.
Wow. They even mentioned something about declining birth rates.
Yeah, that was a pretty provocative point they raised. The concern is that in some developed societies, the dopamine system, which is really good at seeking immediate personal gratification, exploration, novelty, careers, travel, luxury items, even immersive virtual experiences,
Mhm.
might make the huge, long-term, often challenging investment of raising a family seem less appealing by comparison. Raising kids relies heavily on those here and now bonding chemicals like oxytocin.
So why pursue that difficult delayed reward when you can get instant dopamine hits elsewhere?
That's the potential tension they highlight, yeah. Especially with things like VR becoming more compelling.
It really sounds like the sources are painting a picture of a world potentially being driven a bit off course by this constant, excessive pursuit of more. So, what's the main takeaway? What's the solution, according to them?
The absolute core message, the central theme, is the critical need for balance.
Okay.
The sources aren't saying dopamine is inherently bad. It's vital. It drives progress, achievement, everything. But the argument is that overcoming our modern obsession with excessive, unchecked dopamine pursuit and finding a conscious harmony between that future-oriented dopamine system and our present-focused here-and-now chemicals, that's crucial.
Crucial for just feeling better day to day.
For individual well-being, definitely.
Yeah.
But they argue it's potentially crucial even for navigating the future of humanity.
So it's not about shutting dopamine down, but about integrating it better, making it work with the other systems, not dominate
It's
them.
like neither extreme works well. Being stuck in dopamine's relentless chase without ever appreciating the present leads to burnout, anxiety, perpetual dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
But conversely, being stuck only in the present, maybe seeking only immediate pleasure or avoiding all challenge, leads to stagnation or even addiction. The goal is this dynamic equilibrium.
Where dopamine motivates you to do meaningful things.
Right. Things that require effort,
And then the here and now chemicals let you actually enjoy the process or the result.
which then provides the satisfaction and resilience to fuel the next worthwhile pursuit. It's a cycle.
Okay, so practically speaking, how do the sources suggest we actually find this balance? What are the strategies?
They offer several useful pathways. One big one is mastering a skill or engaging in deep work.
Deep work.
Yeah, this is where you consciously use dopamine's drive for pursuit and control. It's focused on the future goal to dedicate yourself fully to a challenging task.
Like getting into a flow state, that feeling of being totally absorbed.
Precisely. Flow is a perfect example.
Yeah.
You're pursuing mastery, which is dopamine-driven, but you're finding deep satisfaction in the process itself, in the present moment of concentration. That engages the here and now chemicals.
Ah, so the reward isn't just the final outcome.
Exactly. It's the intrinsic satisfaction of the effort, the feeling of competence, the focus. Dopamine gets you started and keeps you going, but the here and now chemicals reward the journey itself.
Okay, that makes sense. What's another strategy they suggest?
Connecting with nature and actually allowing for proper rest. Our modern world is just constantly pinging our dopamine systems, isn't it? Notifications, alerts, emails, social media.
Nonstop.
So deliberately stepping away from that relentless stimulation, spending time in nature, which tends to be calming and engaging in a less demanding way, or simply allowing for genuine downtime without filling it with more stimulation that lets the brain systems rebalance.
Gives the here and now chemicals a chance to come online.
Exactly. Without dopamine immediately hijacking your attention for the next thing.
And they also mentioned something about focus, or lack thereof.
Yes, a really key one. Focusing on the present and actively avoiding multitasking.
Ah, the multitasking myth.
Right. Trying to juggle multiple things keeps dopamine levels high because you're constantly switching context, getting tiny little hits of novelty or completion from dipping in and out of tasks. But the sources cite research showing that this constant partial attention actually makes us less happy, less satisfied. Truly concentrating on one thing at a time allows those here and now chemicals to provide the deeper satisfaction that comes from full engagement.
Really being present with what you're doing makes sense. Okay, and what was the last main strategy?
Engaging in creative activities, things
Right.
like, painting, crafting, building something, playing music, writing.
Things you do for the love of it.
That's the key.
Right.
The emphasis is on finding intrinsic satisfaction from the process itself, not just doing it solely for external rewards like money or fame or likes.
Right.
These activities often involve a dopamine-driven initial spark or goal, but the sustained effort and the enjoyment come from the here and now experience of creating, allowing both systems to work together in that balanced way.
Wow. This has been a really illuminating deep dive. We've kind of journeyed from seeing dopamine as just this simple pleasure thing
Mm-hmm.
to understanding its much more complex role as the engine of desire, of pursuit, how it's so powerfully triggered by what's next, by uncertainty.
Yeah, and how that influences everything from, falling in love to addiction to maybe even global trends like consumerism or environmental issues.
And the core message that keeps coming through from the sources that understanding this powerful drive is one thing, but consciously finding that balance, that harmony with our present focus satisfaction chemicals, it's
Yeah,
really vital.
vital for our own well-being day to day, and maybe, as the sources suggest, even for navigating the big challenges we face collectively.
So let's leave you, the listener, with this final thought to chew on, drawing directly from the implications in our source material. Considering just how much of our modern world seems deliberately engineered to trigger and even hijack our dopamine system, infinite feeds, instant gratification, the constant push for newness, how might you personally, consciously cultivate more appreciation for the near space, for the here and now in your own daily life?
And how could actively doing that, seeking that balance, fundamentally shift your experience of the world around you?
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.